The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan valley as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her radio headset and scanned the horizon through her binoculars. Her weathered hands, scarred from 3 deployments, gripped the equipment with practiced ease. The Marine Corps had taught her many things over her 8-year career, but nothing had prepared her for the phone call she'd received 2 weeks earlier. Her younger brother Danny had been missing for 72 hours in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. The Navy SEALs had taken over the search and rescue operation, classifying it as a high-priority extraction mission. Maria had immediately requested emergency leave to join the search, but her commanding officer had denied it. Military protocol dictated that family members couldn't participate in active combat operations involving their relatives. But Maria Santos had never been one to follow orders blindly, especially when they involved abandoning family. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now found herself in almost the exact situation she'd warned Danny about 6 months ago during his last leave. They'd sat on their childhood home's front porch in small-town Texas, drinking beer and watching fireflies dance in the humid evening air. Danny, fresh out of basic training and eager for his first deployment, had brushed off her concerns with the typical bravado of a 19-year-old Marine. "You worry too much, sis," he'd said, flashing that cocky grin that had gotten him into trouble since he was 5 years old. "I can handle whatever they throw at me over there. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Maria had set down her beer bottle with more force than necessary, the glass clinking against the wooden porch rail. "The worst that could happen? Danny, you have no idea what you're walking into. The mountains over there aren't like anything you've trained for. The terrain is unforgiving, the weather changes in minutes, and the enemy knows every cave, every ridge, every hiding spot. One wrong turn, one moment of overconfidence, and you're dead or captured." But Danny had just laughed and shaken his head. "Come on, Maria. I've been through the same training you did. I know how to handle myself. You're being paranoid." "I'm being realistic," she'd shot back. "I've been there, Danny. I've seen good Marines make stupid decisions because they thought they were invincible. I've seen convoys get ambushed because someone decided to take a shortcut. I've seen—" She'd stopped herself, unable to voice the memories that still haunted her dreams. The argument had escalated from there, with Danny accusing her of trying to scare him, and Maria becoming increasingly frustrated with his dismissive attitude. Their mother had eventually intervened, suggesting they table the discussion for another time. But that time had never come. Danny had shipped out 2 weeks later, and their last conversation had ended with him saying, "Don't worry, sis. When I come back with stories of all my heroic adventures, you can tell me you told me so." Now, as Maria crouched behind a boulder on a mountainside 8,000 miles from that Texas porch, those words echoed in her mind with cruel irony. She'd give anything to have been wrong, to have Danny safe and sound, ready to prove her concerns unfounded. The SEAL team had established their temporary command post in a small village 3 clicks from where Danny's patrol had been ambushed. Maria had managed to convince a sympathetic helicopter pilot to give her a ride to the forward operating base, claiming she had intelligence about the area that could help with the rescue mission. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did know these mountains better than most, having spent 2 tours patrolling similar terrain. But getting to the village was only the first step. The SEALs weren't going to welcome an uninvited Marine, especially one with personal stakes in the mission. She needed to find a way to insert herself into the operation without compromising it or getting herself arrested for disobeying orders. The village itself was a collection of mud brick buildings clustered around a central courtyard, surrounded by terraced fields that climbed the mountainside like giant steps. The local population had been evacuated after the ambush, leaving behind an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional bleating of abandoned goats and the distant sound of helicopters. Maria made her way carefully through the narrow streets. Using the shadows and doorways to avoid detection by the SEAL sentries she could see positioned on rooftops and at key choke points. Her combat experience served her well as she moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile territory while staying invisible to both enemies and allies. The command post was set up in what had once been the village school, its windows sandbagged and radio antennas sprouting from the roof like metal weeds. Through a crack in the wooden door, Maria could see maps spread across tables, the familiar blue and red markers indicating friendly and enemy positions. The voices inside were tense, but professional, the kind of controlled urgency she recognized from her own combat experiences. Target building is approximately 2 clicks northeast of here, she heard someone say. Intelligence suggests 3 to 5 enemy combatants, possibly holding multiple hostages, including our missing Marine. Maria's heart clenched at the clinical description of Danny as a missing Marine. To these men, he was a mission objective, a problem to be solved. To her, he was the little brother who used to build elaborate sand castles in their backyard, who'd cried when their father left, who joined the Marines partly to prove he could be as tough as his big sister. She moved closer to the window, pressing herself against the wall to avoid being seen while still being able to hear the conversation inside. The SEAL team leader was briefing his squad on the assault plan, his voice carrying the weight of command and years of similar operations. We go in at 0200 hours. Johnson and Martinez take the north approach. Williams and Thompson circle around to cover the south exit. I'll breach through the main entrance with Rodriguez providing overwatch from the ridge. Questions? Maria bit back the urge to burst through the door and volunteer her knowledge of the terrain. She knew these mountains, knew the way sound carried between the peaks, knew which routes offered the best cover and which ones turned into death traps when the enemy had time to prepare. But she also knew that her emotional investment in the mission would be seen as a liability rather than an asset. The briefing continued with discussions of equipment, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Maria absorbed every detail, her military training automatically cataloging the information and analyzing the tactical situation. The plan was solid but conservative, designed to minimize risk to the SEAL team while still giving them the best chance of rescuing Danny and any other hostages. But, as she listened, Maria began to identify potential problems with their approach. The north route they'd chosen would take the team directly past a series of caves that offered perfect hiding spots for enemy reinforcements. The south exit they planned to cover was actually a decoy. The real escape route was through a narrow canyon that didn't show up clearly on their maps, but which she'd used herself during her last deployment. More importantly, the timing of their assault assumed the enemy would be following a predictable schedule. But Maria knew from experience that insurgent groups in this region often kept irregular hours, using the uncertainty as a psychological weapon against both hostages and potential rescue forces. She also noticed that the SEAL team's intelligence was at least 12 hours old, gathered from drone reconnaissance and intercepted communications. In 12 hours, everything could change. Hostages could be moved, guards could be reinforced, or the entire situation could deteriorate beyond the point of a successful rescue. As the briefing concluded and the SEALs began their final preparations, Maria made a decision that would have consequences she couldn't yet imagine. She couldn't stand by and watch while a flawed plan potentially cost Danny his life. Her brother might have dismissed her warnings, but she'd be damned if she'd let his overconfidence become a death sentence. Moving away from the command post, she began her own reconnaissance of the target area. Using terrain features and shadows for concealment, she worked her way up the mountainside toward the building where the SEALs believed Danny was being held. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. This wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was about positioning herself to intervene if the rescue operation went wrong. The target building came into view as she crested a rocky outcrop about 800 meters from the SEAL command post. It was a traditional Afghan compound, built around a central courtyard with high walls and limited entry points. From her elevated position, Maria could see movement in the courtyard, at least 3 figures moving with the casual confidence of people who felt secure in their position. But what caught her attention wasn't the obvious guards in the courtyard. It was the subtle signs that suggested the compound was more heavily defended than the SEALs realized. Freshly disturbed earth near the walls indicated recently dug fighting positions. Solar panels on the roof meant they had power for communications equipment. Most telling of all, she spotted the muzzle of what looked like a heavy machine gun positioned to cover the main approach route the SEALs had planned to use. This wasn't just a holding facility, it was a trap. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her painfully of Texas sunsets, Maria settled in to wait and watch. The SEALs would begin their assault in less than 6 hours. She had that long to figure out how to save both the rescue team and her brother from walking into what was clearly an ambush. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Danny had dismissed her warnings about the dangers of overconfidence and poor intelligence. Now she was watching an elite SEAL team make similar assumptions based on incomplete information. The difference was that Danny had made his mistakes as a young Marine eager to prove himself. The SEALs were making theirs as experienced operators who should have known better. But pointing fingers wouldn't help anyone. What mattered now was preventing a disaster that would cost multiple lives, including her brother's. Maria checked her equipment, verified her ammunition count, and began planning her own intervention. If the SEALs walked into that trap, she'd need to be ready to provide the kind of assistance that could turn a failed rescue into a successful extraction. The temperature began to drop as darkness settled over the mountains, and Maria pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. In a few hours, she'd either be proven wrong about the threat level, or she'd be fighting for her life and her brother's survival. Either way, she was exactly where she needed to be. The words, "I told you so," had never carried such bitter weight. The digital clock on Maria's watch showed 0130 hours when she first spotted the movement that confirmed her worst fears. Through her night vision scope, she watched as additional fighters moved into positions around the compound, their infrared signatures glowing like ghostly figures in the green-tinted display. What the SEAL intelligence had identified as a lightly defended holding facility was actually a carefully orchestrated kill zone. Maria counted at least 12 enemy combatants taking up concealed positions along the approach routes the SEALs planned to use. The machine gun nest she'd spotted earlier was now clearly manned, with additional crew-served weapons positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Worse still, she could see what appeared to be improvised explosive devices being armed along the primary infiltration route. Her throat tightened as she realized the full scope of what was about to unfold. The SEALs were walking into a textbook ambush, one that had been carefully planned and prepared over the past several hours while they'd been finalizing their assault plans. The enemy had used the time to turn the compound from a simple holding facility into a deadly trap that would likely result in the death or capture of the entire SEAL team. Through her earpiece, which she'd managed to program to monitor the SEAL communication frequency, she could hear the final preparations beginning. The team was moving into position, their voices calm and professional despite the danger they didn't yet realize they were walking into. In 30 minutes, they would breach the compound and discover too late that they were outnumbered and outgunned. Maria faced an impossible choice. She could maintain her overwatch position and potentially witness the destruction of both the rescue team and any hope of saving Danny. Or she could break radio silence and warn the SEALs, revealing her unauthorized presence and potentially compromising the entire mission. Neither option guaranteed a successful outcome, but one at least offered the possibility of preventing a complete disaster. But as she reached for her radio, a new development changed everything. Through her scope, she saw a figure being dragged from the main building into the central courtyard. Even at this distance, and in the green wash of night vision, she recognized the distinctive build and gait of her younger brother. Danny was alive, but he was being used as bait to ensure the SEAL team committed fully to their assault route. The sight of her brother's obviously injured form being positioned in clear view of the main entrance triggered something primal in Maria's combat-trained mind. All the tactical considerations, all the protocols and procedures she'd been weighing, suddenly became secondary to a single overwhelming imperative: get Danny out of there alive. She switched her radio to the SEAL frequency and broke silence. SEAL team leader, this is Overwatch. You are walking into a prepared ambush. Repeat, you are walking into a prepared ambush. I have eyes on at least 12 enemy combatants in concealed positions along your planned approach routes. The response was immediate and predictably hostile. Overwatch, this is SEAL team leader. Identify yourself immediately. You are not authorized on this frequency. SEAL team leader, there's no time for this. You have multiple crew-served weapons positioned to create a kill zone. IEDs are armed along your primary infiltration route. The target building is a trap. Unknown station, cease transmission immediately. You are compromising operational security. Maria cursed under her breath. The SEAL team leader was following protocol, treating her as a potential enemy attempting to disrupt their mission. In his position, she would have done the same thing. But protocol was about to get everyone killed. Through her scope, she watched the lead elements of the SEAL team moving into position. They were good. Their movement was textbook perfect, their spacing and coordination flawless. But they were moving into a kill zone that would neutralize all their training and experience the moment the ambush was triggered. She made a decision that went against every military regulation she'd ever sworn to uphold. Abandoning her overwatch position, Maria began moving down the mountainside toward the compound at a dead run, using every piece of cover available while maintaining visual contact with both the SEAL team and the enemy positions. Her plan, such as it was, relied on creating enough chaos to disrupt the ambush and give the SEALs a fighting chance. It wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't by the book, and it probably wasn't going to work. But it was better than watching everyone die according to proper protocol. As she reached the perimeter of the kill zone, Maria could see the SEAL team beginning their final approach. The enemy fighters were holding their fire, waiting for the entire team to move into the optimal engagement area. It was a disciplined ambush, the kind that required experienced leadership and well-trained fighters. Maria reached into her pack and pulled out 2 white phosphorus grenades, equipment she'd borrowed from the forward operating base ammunition depot during her unauthorized journey to the village. White phosphorus was controversial, its use restricted in many situations, but it had one crucial advantage in this scenario. It would create immediate chaos and confusion, potentially disrupting the carefully choreographed ambush. She positioned herself at the edge of the compound's defensive perimeter, close enough to the machine gun nest to ensure her grenades would have maximum effect. Through her night vision, she could see the gunner tracking the approaching SEALs, his finger poised on the trigger. In less than 60 seconds, the ambush would begin. Taking a deep breath, Maria armed both grenades and threw them in quick succession toward the machine gun position and the largest concentration of enemy fighters. The 4-second fuse seemed to last forever as she pressed herself against the rocky ground and prepared for the chaos that was about to erupt. The twin explosions lit up the night sky like miniature suns, the white phosphorus creating a brilliant, burning cloud that immediately disrupted the enemy's night vision and threw their carefully planned positions into disarray. Screams of confusion and pain echoed across the compound as fighters found themselves temporarily blinded and disoriented. The SEAL team's response was immediate and professional. Instead of freezing in surprise, they immediately shifted their approach, using the confusion to advance from an unexpected direction. Maria could hear their leader's voice over the radio, adapting the plan in real time to take advantage of the situation she'd created. Team leader to all elements. Unknown friendly has disrupted the ambush. Advance through Sector 7. Use the smoke for concealment. Rodriguez, can you identify our guardian angel? Maria was already moving, working her way around the compound's perimeter toward the building where Danny was being held. The white phosphorus had bought them time, but it wouldn't last long. The enemy would recover quickly and begin reorganizing their defense. She needed to reach her brother before they regained their tactical advantage. As she approached the main building, Maria could hear gunfire erupting throughout the compound as the SEALs engaged the disoriented but still dangerous enemy force. The sound of automatic weapons and exploding grenades filled the night air, punctuated by shouted orders in both English and what she recognized as Pashto. The building itself was a 2-story structure with thick stone walls and narrow windows, typical Afghan architecture designed for defense. She could see muzzle flashes from the upper floors where defenders were trying to establish firing positions to repel the SEAL assault. But the white phosphorus smoke was still providing concealment, making accurate fire difficult for both sides. Maria reached the building's rear entrance, a heavy wooden door reinforced with metal bands. Through a crack in the wood, she could see into a dimly lit corridor where at least 2 guards were positioned. Beyond them, she could hear voices speaking in urgent Pashto. The enemy was trying to regroup and coordinate their defense. She checked her ammunition and equipment one final time. Her M4 carbine had a full magazine plus 2 spares. She had 3 fragmentation grenades remaining, plus her sidearm and knife. Against an unknown number of defenders in a fortified position, it wasn't much. But it would have to be enough. The sound of the SEAL assault was growing closer, with gunfire now coming from multiple directions around the compound. The enemy was being pressed from several angles, which would hopefully draw some of the defenders away from the building where Danny was being held. But Maria couldn't count on that. She had to assume she was going in alone against a well-prepared defensive position. Through her earpiece, she heard the SEAL team leader's voice again, this time directed at her. Unknown friendly, if you can hear this transmission, we have positive contact with multiple hostiles. Can you provide status on the primary objective? Maria keyed her radio, knowing that her response would confirm her unauthorized presence, but no longer caring about the consequences. SEAL team leader, I have eyes on the target building. At least 2 guards visible inside, unknown additional personnel. The package is inside and appears to be mobile. Unknown friendly, maintain overwatch and do not, repeat do not, attempt entry. We are advancing on your position. But Maria was already moving. The SEALs were still at least 5 minutes away, engaged with enemy forces throughout the compound. In 5 minutes, the defenders could kill Danny, move him to another location, or use him as a human shield. She couldn't wait for backup that might arrive too late. She approached the rear door carefully, listening for movement inside, while watching for any change in the guard positions she could see through the crack. The 2 visible guards were facing toward the front of the building, obviously expecting any assault to come through the main entrance. Their positioning gave her a narrow window of opportunity. Using her knife, Maria carefully worked at the door's latch, applying pressure in small increments to avoid creating any noise that might alert the guards inside. The mechanism was old but well-maintained, and after several tense minutes, she felt it give way. The door was now unlocked, but opening it would expose her to immediate enemy fire. She pulled the pin on one of her remaining fragmentation grenades, but held the spoon in place, keeping the weapon from activating while she prepared her assault. The plan was simple and desperate. Throw the grenade into the corridor, use the explosion to disorient the guards, then enter immediately and neutralize any remaining threats before advancing deeper into the building. Maria took a deep breath, said a silent prayer for Danny's safety, and pulled open the door. The corridor beyond was exactly as she'd observed through the crack. 2 guards positioned near the front entrance, their attention focused on the sounds of battle coming from outside. Neither noticed the door opening behind them. She released the grenade spoon, counted to 3, and threw the weapon down the corridor. The explosion in the confined space was deafening, the overpressure slamming into her even from her protected position. Before the smoke had cleared, she was moving through the doorway with her rifle raised, scanning for targets and threats. The 2 guards had been knocked down by the explosion, one clearly unconscious, and the other attempting to reach for his weapon despite obvious injuries. Maria neutralized the threat with controlled bursts of automatic fire, her training overriding any hesitation about taking human life in defense of her brother. Moving deeper into the building, she could hear voices coming from what sounded like a basement or lower level. The sounds were muffled, suggesting thick walls or significant distance, but she could make out at least 3 distinct speakers. One voice was different from the others, younger, speaking English with a Texas accent that made her heart pound with recognition. Danny was alive and apparently conscious. Now she just had to reach him before the remaining enemy fighters realized their defensive position had been compromised from an unexpected direction. The sound of gunfire from outside was intensifying, suggesting the SEAL assault was reaching its climax. But down here in the building's interior, Maria was on her own. The stairway leading to the lower level was narrow and steep, carved directly into the building's stone foundation. Maria descended slowly, testing each step for structural integrity while keeping her rifle trained on the darkness below. The voices she'd heard earlier had gone silent after the grenade explosion upstairs, which meant the remaining guards were either dead, unconscious, or waiting in ambush. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy wooden door blocked her path. Light leaked around its edges, and she could hear movement beyond, careful, deliberate sounds that suggested someone was trying to remain hidden while still maintaining a defensive position. The silence was more unnerving than gunfire would have been. It meant the enemy was disciplined enough to maintain tactical patience even under pressure. Maria pressed her ear to the door, trying to gather intelligence about the room's layout and the number of people inside. She could hear breathing, at least 3 people, possibly more. One person was moving around the room with a regular pattern, like a guard making rounds. Another seemed to be stationary near what she guessed was the far wall based on the direction of the sounds. The third person wasn't moving at all, which either meant they were extremely disciplined or unable to move freely. "Danny." Through the wood, she heard a voice speaking in accented English. "The explosions have stopped. Either our men have repelled the attack, or the Americans have been killed. In either case, we must be ready to move the prisoner." Another voice responded in Pashto, too quick and muffled for Maria to understand completely, but the tone was clearly argumentative. Based on her limited knowledge of the language and the context, it sounded like a disagreement about what to do with their captive. A third voice cut through the argument, speaking in clear English with unmistakable authority. "The prisoner stays alive until we receive confirmation about the attack's outcome. If the Americans are dead, he becomes valuable for intelligence and propaganda. If they escaped, he becomes our insurance policy for safe passage." Maria's blood ran cold as she recognized the tactical sophistication in that statement. This wasn't a random group of insurgents holding Danny for ransom or propaganda purposes. These were experienced fighters with a clear understanding of hostage dynamics and psychological warfare. They would kill Danny without hesitation if they perceived it to be tactically advantageous. The sound of approaching helicopters filtered down through the building's structure, growing louder with each passing second. The SEALs were calling in support, which meant the exterior battle was either concluding successfully or going badly enough to require immediate extraction. Either scenario increased the pressure on the situation downstairs. Through the door, she heard the authoritative voice again. "Aircraft approaching. Prepare to move the prisoner through the tunnel system. Kill him if capture appears imminent." Maria's tactical training immediately cataloged the implications. A tunnel system meant multiple escape routes that wouldn't appear on any satellite imagery or drone reconnaissance. The enemy had been planning this operation for weeks or months, creating contingencies for exactly this type of rescue attempt. Worse, they were prepared to execute Danny rather than allow his rescue. She had minutes at most before they moved him to a location where even a successful assault might result in his death. The time for careful reconnaissance and methodical planning had passed. She needed to act immediately, aggressively, and without regard for her own safety. Maria pulled her last 2 fragmentation grenades from her equipment vest, checking their condition and planning their deployment. The door was heavy wood reinforced with metal, but the hinges and latch mechanism were likely vulnerable points. If she could breach the entrance quickly enough, she might catch the guards before they could react to her presence. She positioned one grenade against the door's lower hinge, using the pin to wedge it in place while keeping the spoon compressed. The second grenade went against the upper hinge, creating what would effectively be a dual-point explosive breach. When detonated simultaneously, the explosions should destroy the door's structural integrity and create an entry point large enough for immediate assault. The sound of automatic weapons fire from outside was intensifying again, suggesting the SEAL team was still engaged with enemy forces throughout the compound. She could also hear the distinctive rotor noise of attack helicopters beginning their gun runs against fixed positions. The external battle was reaching its climax, which meant she was running out of time before the situation either resolved successfully or deteriorated beyond recovery. Through her earpiece, she heard the SEAL team leader's voice, strained but controlled. "Unknown friendly. If you're still monitoring this frequency, we need immediate status on the primary objective. We're preparing for emergency extraction and need confirmation on package location." Maria keyed her radio one final time. "SEAL team leader, I am inside the target building, basement level, preparing to breach the holding room. Package is alive, but enemy is preparing to execute and exfiltrate through unknown tunnel system. Beginning assault in 30 seconds. Unknown friendly, negative. Wait for backup. Do not attempt solo breach of fortified position." But Maria was already removing the pins from both grenades, holding the spoons in place while she positioned herself for the assault. She had perhaps 20 seconds before the explosions, then another 5 to 10 seconds before the smoke cleared enough for accurate shooting. In that window, she needed to identify and neutralized multiple targets while avoiding hitting Danny. Sorry, SEAL team leader, but this is a family matter. She released both spoons simultaneously and pressed herself against the wall next to the stairway, counting down the 4-second fuses while preparing for the concussion that would announce the beginning of what would likely be the most important firefight of her life. The twin explosions in the confined space were devastating. The door disintegrated in a cloud of wooden splinters and metal fragments, and the overpressure wave hit Maria even from her protected position behind the stone wall. But before the debris had finished falling, she was moving through the breach with her rifle raised and her finger on the trigger. The room beyond was larger than she'd expected, with stone walls and a dirt floor that suggested it had been excavated specifically for this purpose. 3 men were visible in the smoke and dust, all armed but momentarily disoriented by the explosions. Danny was against the far wall, zip-tied to a wooden chair but clearly alive and alert. Maria's training took over, her muscle memory and combat experience operating faster than conscious thought. The nearest guard was reaching for an AK-47 that had been knocked from his hands by the explosion. She put 2 rounds center mass and was already tracking to the second target before the first man hit the ground. The second guard had maintained his grip on his weapon but was struggling to bring it to bear through the smoke and debris. Maria's shots caught him in the chest and shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle skittering across the dirt floor. The third man, the one whose voice she'd recognized as the leader, had taken cover behind a wooden table and was shouting orders in Pashto while trying to draw a pistol from his belt. Maria's next burst of fire shredded the table and forced him to dive for better cover near the room's rear wall. "Danny, are you hurt? Can you move?" she called out while maintaining her position near the destroyed doorway and scanning for additional threats. "Maria? What the hell are you doing here?" Danny's voice was hoarse but strong, tinged with disbelief and relief in equal measure. "These guys have been planning to move me through some kind of tunnel system. There's an entrance behind that pile of boxes." The leader's voice came from behind his improvised cover, speaking in accented English. "So, the sister comes to rescue the foolish brother. Very touching, but you are too late. My men control all the exits, and more fighters are coming through the tunnels. You have accomplished nothing except ensuring you will die together." Maria smiled grimly as she reloaded her rifle. "Maybe, but at least I'll have the satisfaction of proving I was right about everything I warned him about." She could hear movement from behind the boxes Danny had mentioned, the scraping of stone against stone that suggested a hidden entrance being opened. The tunnel system wasn't just an escape route. It was a reinforcement corridor that would bring additional enemy fighters directly into the room within minutes. "Danny, we need to move right now. Can you stand if I cut those restraints?" "Yeah, I think so. My legs are cramped, but functional." "Maria, there are at least 6 more guys coming through those tunnels. We need to get out of here." The sound of approaching helicopters was growing louder, and Maria could hear the SEAL team's radio chatter indicating they were advancing on the building's main entrance. But the tunnel reinforcements would arrive first, turning the rescue into a desperate last stand in an underground chamber with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. Maria made another tactical decision based on incomplete information and desperate circumstances. Instead of trying to hold the room until the SEALs arrived, she would create a diversion that would force the enemy to choose between pursuing her and Danny or defending against the approaching SEAL assault. "When I say move, head for the stairs as fast as you can. I'm going to create some chaos to cover our exit." She pulled out her white phosphorus grenade, her last piece of specialized equipment, and prepared to throw it toward the tunnel entrance. The burning chemical would create an effective barrier against anyone trying to advance through the narrow passage, while also generating enough smoke to provide concealment for their escape attempt. But before she could throw the grenade, the sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the tunnel entrance. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness beyond the boxes, and bullets began ricocheting off the stone walls around their position. The reinforcements had arrived and were advancing under fire, using the tunnel's confined space to concentrate their firepower. "Move now," Maria shouted, throwing the white phosphorus grenade toward the tunnel mouth while laying down suppressive fire to keep the leader pinned behind his cover. The burning chemical erupted in a brilliant flare that immediately filled the rear portion of the room with toxic smoke. Danny struggled to his feet, his movements stiff but determined. Despite his ordeal, his Marine training was evident in the way he moved toward the exit while staying low to avoid the increasing volume of gunfire coming from multiple directions. But as they reached the destroyed doorway, Maria realized their escape route was compromised. The stairway above was filled with the sound of boots and shouted orders in Pashto. More enemy fighters had entered the building from above and were moving to cut off their exit. They were trapped between two forces in an underground room that was rapidly filling with toxic smoke and becoming increasingly untenable as a defensive position. The SEAL team was still somewhere outside the building, engaged with other enemy forces and unaware of the immediate tactical situation in the basement. Maria looked at her brother, seeing in his face the same determination that had driven him to join the Marines despite her warnings. But now, instead of youthful overconfidence, she saw the hard-earned wisdom of a combat veteran who understood exactly how desperate their situation had become. "Well, sis," Danny said with a grim smile that reminded her of their father, "I guess now would be a good time to tell you that you were right about everything. But what's the plan for getting us out of here alive?" Maria chambered a fresh round and prepared for what would likely be the longest few minutes of their lives. "The plan is simple, little brother. We fight our way out together, or we don't get out at all." The white phosphorus smoke was becoming thicker, creating a chemical fog that burned their lungs and limited visibility to less than 3 feet. Maria could hear enemy fighters moving through the tunnel system behind them, their voices echoing off stone walls as they coordinated their advance. Above, boots thundered down the wooden staircase as more insurgents moved to seal off their escape route. "We're going to have to fight through the stairs," Maria told Danny, her voice muffled by the improvised mask she'd torn from her sleeve. "The tunnel's a death trap, and staying here means getting surrounded." Danny nodded, testing his balance and flexibility after hours of restraint. His face was bruised, and his left arm hung stiffly, but his eyes held the focused intensity of a Marine preparing for combat. "I'm with you, but I need a weapon. These guys took everything when they captured my patrol." Maria handed him her sidearm and one of her spare magazines. "It's not much, but it's better than going up those stairs empty-handed. Stay behind me and watch for crossfire from the tunnel entrance." The sound of approaching helicopters had intensified to the point where the entire building was vibrating with rotor wash. Through the stone walls, they could hear the distinctive sound of chain guns opening fire, followed by explosions as missiles found their targets. The SEAL air support was systematically destroying defensive positions throughout the compound. But the airstrike also meant increased urgency for the enemy forces inside the building. They would either escape through their tunnel system in the next few minutes, or they would be trapped and likely killed when the SEALs breached the building with helicopter support. That desperation made them more dangerous, but also more likely to make tactical mistakes. Maria started up the narrow staircase with Danny close behind, moving slowly to minimize noise while listening for enemy positions above. The stairs themselves were a tactical nightmare, narrow enough that only one person could advance at a time, with stone walls that would funnel grenades and automatic weapons fired directly down toward anyone trying to climb. Halfway up the staircase, she heard voices speaking in hushed Pashto just beyond the door at the top. At least 2 people, possibly 3, positioned to ambush anyone trying to exit from the basement. But their positioning also suggested they were focused on preventing escape rather than mounting an active assault, which meant they might not be prepared for an aggressive advance. "When we hit that door, go right immediately," Maria whispered to Danny. "There's at least 2 hostiles positioned for ambush, but they're expecting us to come up slowly and carefully. We're going to hit them fast and hard before they can adjust." Danny's response was barely audible over the sound of helicopters and distant gunfire. "Roger that. On your signal." Maria pulled her last fragmentation grenade from her vest, holding it while she listened to the enemy positions above. The voices had moved slightly, suggesting the guards were adjusting their positions as the external battle intensified. If she could time the assault correctly, she might catch them during their movement when they were most vulnerable. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from somewhere directly above them, followed by shouting in both English and Pashto. The SEALs had breached the building's main entrance and were fighting their way through the first floor. The enemy guards at the top of the staircase would be torn between maintaining their ambush position and responding to the immediate threat from the SEAL assault. Now, Maria pulled the pin on her grenade and threw it up the staircase, following immediately behind it while Danny moved up close behind her. The confined space amplified the explosion, and she was through the doorway before the debris had finished falling. The room beyond was chaos. 2 enemy fighters had been knocked down by the grenade blast, one clearly out of the fight, and the other struggling to reach his weapon. A third man was firing out a window at SEAL positions, his attention completely focused on the external battle. Maria's shots caught the struggling guard before he could retrieve his rifle, while Danny moved right as instructed and engaged the fighter at the window. The man spun around at the sound of gunfire behind him, but Danny's training proved decisive in the close-quarters firefight that followed. Building secure, basement level, Maria called out on the SEAL frequency. 2 friendly personnel moving to exit through main entrance. The response came immediately from the team leader. Unknown friendly. Negative on main entrance exit. Building is not secure. We have multiple hostiles still active on upper floors and unknown tunnel connections. Move to the north window and prepare for helicopter extraction. Through the window Danny had been covering, Maria could see the tactical situation outside. The compound was littered with destroyed defensive positions and burning equipment where the helicopter gun runs had found their targets. But she could also see muzzle flashes from multiple buildings throughout the village, indicating the SEAL team was still engaged with significant enemy forces. Danny, we need to get to that north window for helicopter pickup. But first, help me secure this room so we don't get shot in the back during extraction. Working together, they quickly checked the remaining corners and doorways, ensuring no additional threats were present. The room itself was clearly a command and communication center, with radio equipment, maps, and documents scattered throughout. Maria grabbed several documents that looked like operational plans, stuffing them into her equipment vest for later intelligence analysis. The north window offered a view of the mountainside where the SEAL helicopter was approaching for pickup. But the landing zone was still under sporadic fire from enemy positions higher up the ridge, forcing the aircraft to maintain a defensive orbit while the crew chief returned fire with mounted machine guns. SEAL team leader, this is Overwatch. What's your status for extraction? We have 2 personnel ready for pickup at the north window. Overwatch, we're still engaged with multiple hostiles on the building's upper floors. Unknown number of additional fighters emerging from tunnel system at various points throughout the compound. Extraction helicopter is taking fire and cannot land until we clear the immediate area. Through the radio chatter, Maria could hear the sound of grenades and automatic weapons fire from somewhere above them in the same building. The SEALs were fighting their way through what was clearly a much larger enemy force than anyone had anticipated. The tunnel system wasn't just an escape route. It was an entire underground complex that connected multiple buildings and defensive positions. Danny, we might be here a while. Help me fortify this position in case they try to retake the building. They used furniture and equipment to create improvised fighting positions covering the room's entrances and the stairway they'd used to escape from the basement. The documents Maria had captured included detailed maps of the tunnel system, showing a network of passages that extended throughout the village and into the surrounding hills. Jesus, Maria, look at this, Danny said, studying one of the maps. This whole village is like an underground fortress. They've been preparing for this kind of assault for months, maybe years. The implications were staggering. The intelligence that had identified this as a simple holding facility had been completely wrong. Instead of rescuing Danny from a small group of insurgents, the SEALs had attacked a major enemy stronghold with extensive defensive preparations and unknown numbers of fighters. Through the window, Maria could see the helicopter extraction becoming increasingly dangerous as more enemy positions opened fire from concealed locations throughout the valley. The aircraft was forced to break off its approach run twice as rocket-propelled grenades barely missed the rotor assembly. SEAL team leader, this is Overwatch. Based on captured documents, this is not a simple rescue situation. The enemy has extensive tunnel connections throughout the valley and significantly more personnel than estimated. Recommend immediate reinforcement or abort and extract through alternate means. The team leader's response carried the strain of ongoing combat. Overwatch, reinforcements are not immediately available. We're committed to this location until we can secure a viable extraction zone. Can you provide any intelligence on enemy strength or tunnel exit points? Maria studied the captured maps, identifying several tunnel entrances that weren't obvious from surface observation. More importantly, she found what appeared to be the main command bunker, a heavily fortified position built into the ridge above the village that commanded excellent fields of fire over all the approach routes. SEAL Team Leader, I have intelligence on enemy positions. Main command bunker is located at grid reference. She read off the coordinates from the map. Multiple tunnel entrances at various points throughout the village. Estimated total enemy strength based on these documents is between 40 and 60 fighters. The silence that followed her transmission was telling. The SEAL team had planned for a quick strike against maybe a dozen insurgents. Instead, they were engaged with a force that outnumbered them 4-1 in terrain that heavily favored the defenders. But, even as the tactical situation deteriorated, Maria felt a sense of vindication that was immediately overshadowed by guilt. She had been right about the dangers of inadequate intelligence and overconfidence, but being right didn't help the people who were now fighting for their lives because of those mistakes. You know what, sis? Danny said, reloading his pistol while watching the approaches to their position. I should have listened to you 6 months ago. All of this could have been avoided if I hadn't been so eager to prove I could handle anything they threw at me. Maria looked at her brother, seeing not the cocky teenager who had dismissed her warnings, but a combat veteran who had learned hard lessons about the realities of warfare. Danny, you couldn't have known this would happen. Even the intelligence experts got it wrong. Sometimes the best preparation in the world isn't enough when you're dealing with an enemy who's had months to prepare. The sound of automatic weapons fire from the upper floors was intensifying, suggesting the SEAL assault was reaching its climax. Either they would clear the building and secure an extraction zone, or they would be forced to withdraw under fire and find another way out of the valley. Through her earpiece, Maria heard the helicopter pilot's voice, tense but professional. SEAL Team Leader, I'm taking too much fire to maintain orbit over the extraction zone. I need those enemy positions suppressed, or I'll have to return to base for reinforcement. The extraction was falling apart. Even if the SEALs cleared the building, the helicopter couldn't land under the intense fire from the ridge positions. They needed a new plan, and they needed it quickly before the tactical situation deteriorated beyond recovery. Danny, look at this map section, Maria said, pointing to a portion of the tunnel system that extended beyond the village into the mountains. There's a tunnel that leads to a cave system about 2 kilometers north of here. If we could reach that location, it might be out of range of the enemy's prepared firing positions. That's a long way to travel underground through enemy-controlled territory, Danny replied. But it might be our only option if the helicopter can't extract from here. Maria keyed her radio again. SEAL Team Leader, I have a possible alternate extraction plan based on captured intelligence. There's a tunnel system that leads to a cave network approximately 2 kilometers north of current position. If we could reach that location, it might be outside enemy engagement range for helicopter pickup. The response came immediately. Overwatch, that's negative. We don't have enough intelligence about tunnel conditions or enemy control of those passages. Too much risk of walking into another ambush. But as Maria studied the documents more carefully, she noticed something that changed her assessment of their options. The tunnel system included what appeared to be a secondary command bunker near the cave entrance, a position that would allow observation and control of the entire valley. If they could capture that position, they wouldn't just be escaping from the current situation. They would be turning the entire tactical scenario around by seizing the enemy's primary observation and coordination point. SEAL Team Leader, I need to amend my previous recommendation. The tunnel route leads to what appears to be the enemy's main observation post. If we could capture that position, we could disrupt their coordination and provide overwatch for helicopter extraction of all personnel. The silence that followed her transmission lasted nearly 30 seconds. When the team leader's voice returned, it carried a different tone, not just tactical consideration, but the beginning of hope. Overwatch. Explain your assessment of the enemy observation post and its tactical value. Maria smiled as she realized that sometimes being right about one thing could lead to being right about something even more important. The tunnel system that threatened to trap them might actually be the key to turning a failed rescue mission into a tactical victory. SEAL Team Leader. If you're ready to take some serious risks based on captured enemy intelligence, I think I know how we can all get out of here alive while dealing the enemy a defeat they won't forget. Through the chaos of gunfire and explosions outside, Danny looked at his sister with a mixture of admiration and concern. Maria, please tell me your plan doesn't involve us fighting our way through 2 kilometers of enemy tunnels with a pistol and whatever ammunition the SEALs can spare. Maria's grin was predatory as she studied the maps one final time. Oh, little brother, it's going to be much more interesting than that.